Reading Olympus One-Offs by Engineer Forever.
Disclaimer. I don't own Naruto or Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Again. Jason asked curiously as the title Fearless appeared on the screen. It's a continuation. Apollo grinned. Yay. More embarrassing moments for Arte. Stop being so happy over this. Artemis hissed with colored cheeks. I'll read it, Talia said with a small scowl when Annabeth smirked at her. She turned the page and sighed. Some nights. It's funny because he's the son of the moon goddess. Percy sniggered. Nico rolled his eyes. Brilliant deduction. Darkness. Like the last one, I like it already. Hades smirked. From darkness, came fear. From nothing, came life. These are facts told in every religion, in every origin story that is offered in cultures. Oh, there may have been one singularity or entity that started it all, but where did they come from? They just were. Humanity doesn't know how to rationalize origins, try as they might. Life was somewhat simpler when they just accepted the gods' existence. There was bad stormy day. Zeus was obviously pissed. A ship sank. Poseidon was offended. Someone was killed in war. Ares was at play. I could be doing it for a reason. Zeus rebuffed. Oops. Poseidon shrugged haplessly. Ares chuckled in glee like the Neanderthal he was. Now, with the advancements of science and technology, the ugly truth has arisen: humans are cruel animals. No more, no less. Complex animals, mind you, but animals all the same. Like all other animals, they felt fear, but unlike real animals, humans felt that fear was a weakness, a flaw, something to be eradicated. Likely passed down from Ares, hold over the new world. Ares held up his hand to his chest and smiled proudly. I aid humanity in my own, very special way. Yeah, a way that requires them to wear a straight jacket. Hephaestus mocked. Most demigods knew otherwise. Fear was an ally. A drug that could give a demigod a boost when it was needed to win a fight or flee from a powerful force. Fear bred life, thus fear was good. Yeah, just be sure to ignore the yellow stains. Percy nodded in agreement. And wear brown pants. Hermes added with a smile. Fear thrives in the shadows, in the unknown. It is there that Naruto feels most powerful. The mortal son of Artemis, sole nephew to Apollo, perched high on a tree above the small camp of his 3 half-blooded friends, somewhere in the woods of West Virginia. He was in a trace brought on by meditation, a lesser form of sleep, one that kept him fully aware of his surroundings. He learned this on a field trip with his uncle, a trip west into the high mountains of the east. Ah, west and east, how I love those directions. Apollo smiled fondly. You only ever go those directions. Athena pointed out. It's the camaraderie we share of always going the same pattern for centuries. Athena didn't bother to argue against his logic. It would have been pointless when it was obvious that Apollo was just acting stupid for his own entertainment. The trip was one of the last real interactions he had with Apollo prior to leaving the hunt. Apollo showed him the light of humanity, a spiritual journey more than it was physical. Naruto knew, thanks to hindsight, that Apollo was trying to keep him from becoming a mortal male version of Artemis. It's the 40-year-old virgin all over again. Aphrodite cried out as a look of horror covered her face. Only worse. He'll be a monk or something. Monks are cool. Apollo told her. I don't think that's the point, Jason said. But look at all the kung fu movies. Jason nodded in agreement, those were indeed cool. A hunter with little care for mankind save for the young women, maidens, and children under the age of 12, and in most part, he'd failed. Damn it, Apollo. Sorry. The sun god shrugged sheepishly at the glaring love goddess. Thank you, Apollo. Apollo threw his twin a mock glare while she smiled brightly back at him. Naruto did not care for humanity as a whole. He did not believe himself to be bound by religion, nationalism, politics, or mortal law. He had stolen when it needed to be done, he had desecrated what was considered holy ground multiple times to stop crimes, and he cared little who was in charge of what city, state, country. This did not mean Naruto didn't care about humanity. No, Naruto cared for the innocents. Those who choose to leave no mark on the world, to live day by day without real problems, and those who tried to do good, to do what was right. The latter were few and far in between with the materialistic country the gods now dominated. Still, while Naruto cared for some of humanity, the rest, those like the dogs he'd dealt with before he met the group of demigods, he'd rather see them burn. Quite the sadist. I do have internships open. Hades hummed. No, Artemis said. Funny, I never got that choice with my daughter. Stings, doesn't it? Hades asked with a sneer. The question made Artemis guiltily look away. A stick cracked in the distance and Naruto opened an eye. He scanned the area, searched for the source. There was something coming from the north, something that lived in the darkness much like Naruto did. Like Artemis did, Naruto took a deep breath and relaxed his body. He carefully, silently moved from the tree. Once Naruto was back on the forest floor, he slipped through the shadows to find the source. Naruto's steps were slow and soft, but his mind was racing. His heart as well. Had he stumbled across the hunt? Was he to be reunited with the goddess that raised him? How would she react? Would he be greeted with warmth or threatened to leave, to forget, as he was long ago? Warmly. Artemis frowned. I don't know, your girls are kinda dicks. Hermes told her. When he was glared at, the speedster god shrugged and pointed at Apollo. What? I took a page from Mr. Honesty here. Oh, now you do. Go figure. Apollo grumbled with his arms crossed over his chest. A busy mind is a dangerous mind, you know. The man's voice was sudden, but it had Naruto stop and pull out an arrowhead from his pocket. The arrowhead was plucked from his hand by a force unseen to Naruto, but he was familiar of it. It was godly, this force that slapped his weapon from his grasp, and it was old. But it was not Greek. Say what now? Leo squawked in surprise. There's other gods out there. The gods shifted uncomfortably at this. That seemed like you were about to make a bad choice. A loser's bet, in fact. Naruto turned and stared at the well-dressed and handsome young man, his suit a glimmering silver much like the crescent moon above them. His head was shaven save for the lone side lock of dark hair. His eyes were silver, cold and distant, but highly amused. Around the man's neck were many silver chains, a crescent moon medallion hung from one. I think he's got more bling than me, Apollo said. He practically pouted at the realization. I think his ego may match yours. Artemis added with audible awe in her voice. The man walked around Naruto, his amused smile still in place. I had come out here because I thought it was a joke, but here you are. A copycat superhero. First of his kind. Running around the streets of Virginia, kicking ass and taking names. He chuckled and stopped back in front of Naruto with a pensive look on his face. You can't call yourself Moon Knight, it's copyrighted, you know. But, maybe we can make a deal. Hey, that's my domain. Apollo argued with a frown. Isn't it the moon goddess area? Nico asked. No, comics are my thing. They're art. I don't even know who you are. Naruto frowned. The man frowned. No. TCH, are they still sore that they had to ask us for help in World War II? Naruto had no answer. The man rolled his eyes. Oh, enough of the mysterious gimmick. Honestly. He snapped his fingers and Naruto's hood fell from his head, and his mask dropped to rest around his neck. The man arched a brow and whistled lowly. Wicked scars you got there, kid. Didn't think that her hunters were that adamant about the no boys rule. We would never. Artemis shouted in outrage, clear anger in her eyes. Jason looked at Talia with a raised brow. We don't, so stop thinking what you're thinking, Jason. Birthmarks. Naruto frowned. His sisters were against the presence of males in camp, sure, but they never got violent. A bit mean, sometimes, but nothing a hug from another didn't fix. Naruto pushed the memories away and glared at the god that stood before him. Who are you? The man arched a brow and his smile widened. Really? I'm standing before you in a silver-themed attire, not unlike your own or the hunters, with a pendant. He flicked the pendant with his finger and it dangled slightly, of a crescent moon, no less. My eyes are even silver. He's clearly a sun god. Frank nodded sternly with crossed arms. That's not funny. Apollo protested. Like you said, he's got more bling than you. Frank pointed out. Apollo hummed and then snapped his fingers. He was now clad in gold everything, from a jacket, to pants, rings, necklaces, and shades. Without his natural illuminating aura, Apollo shone brightly. Now I've got the bling. He crowed happily. Tone it down. Zeus ordered his son, narrowing his eyes from the obnoxious glare he was radiating. It was more than the usual amount. Apollo pouted and did as told, his bling gone in a flash of light. You're a moon deity. That much I gathered. You're not Greek. You refer to the Olympians as they, and Artemis as her. Distant pronouns. Naruto narrowed his eyes and kept his guard up. The strange god sighed. You'd think with the relationship Rome and Egypt had as well as our recent alliance back in the 40s would wash away their distaste for the rest of us. The grin returned to his face, but his eyes remained distant, cold and slightly angry. He made a grandiose sweep of his arms. Then, allow me to have the pleasure of introducing myself. I am the Egyptian god of time, youths and the moon. Oh, him, Hermes said and rubbed his eyes. That's one twisted bastard if I ever did meet one. Khonsu. Naruto didn't mean to speak, interrupting a god was stupid. He'd made that mistake often when he was a child, and the excuse that he didn't know better only worked so long until Apollo had to pull him aside on their trip. Naruto's uncle had explained to him gravely what interruption could result in. Luckily, Khonsu seemed to be more surprised than he was upset at the interruption. So the costume was a rip-off then. Which version do you like? I prefer Ultimate Moon Knight, to be honest, since I'm not a part of him at all. I have a lot of questions. Naruto realized, more to himself to the Egyptian deity that stood across from him. I approve, you can never have enough questions. Athena nodded. That's not the point here, he shouldn't be socializing with the boy. Zeus frowned. Technically, this version is immortal. So he's free reign. Hera reminded her king. Zeus frowned heavily and crossed his arms. He's been claimed by Artemis, he is an honorary Greek. Not in name, Hera said again. Honestly, her husband's ego was the only reason they had bad terms with the other pantheons. Khonsu grinned. They always do. You're lucky, boy. Mortals, even clear-sighted ones like yourself, are more likely to be ignored by the world. Maybe an immortal reaches out to take you to bed, or maybe a magician takes you as an apprentice, but you, dear boy. You're different. Naruto just swallowed. Different isn't good. It's not bad, either. It just is. Khonsu shrugged. But that's not the point here. What is the point is that you're not the normal breed of clear-sighted mortal that usually runs around. Khonsu pointed at him, his grin wider than before. You, kid, you're a new breed of human. One that no immortal saw coming. That could be good. That could be bad. Depends on who you ask and what agenda is being formed in the background. A new breed. Well, we clearly must milk him of his genes. For science and junk. Ares declared with a vicious grin. You just want that ridiculous super soldier project from the 40s to be brought up again. Athena scowled while Artemis looked ready to carve out Ares' insides. It will happen. Steroids and robotic enhancements will be nothing compared to the super soldiers. Ares raved like a mad god. Oh, hush. Dionysus groaned while he covered his ears. Naruto frowned. You want me to ask what you're getting at, why you decided to show up when no one else has? Seems the Latoids didn't raise no fool, Khonsu said with a chuckle. He adjusted the silver cuffs on his sleeve. You've seen what most immortals see about humanity, and you've seen the promise that lays within. I want to make a bet. Don't do it. He swindles. Hermes said with a hint of worry. And you don't? Percy asked him. Percy, this guy makes me look like a Care Bear, and I used to slit throats and smile at the same time. Quote ellipsis. Well, that's not a disturbing thought. Percy mumbled under his breath. Bets and deals are weighted in immortal favor, Naruto said firmly. Khonsu chuckled again. Yes it is. Well, I suppose I can even the score then. This bet, our wager, will be determined right now. We will play a game of chance, we'll roll this die. A silver cube appeared in Khonsu's hand. The cube was tossed in the air and Naruto caught it. Naruto found that 3 sides were painted with a moon and the other 3 were painted with a bright sun. Well, clearly the sun is bad news. Hey. Apollo frowned at Hermes' words. The sun was never bad luck. The mortal looked at the god, to see the grin still in place. Not weighted nor altered in any way. Khonsu held a hand up. Sworn on Ra's throne. Not very reassuring to one who was raised by an Olympian. Naruto drawled. Kansu rubbed his neck. Ah, got me there. There's an oath for your sword, isn't there? Been a while since I dealt with a Greek. An oath on the sticks, Naruto said. It's the most powerful word of honor the Olympians have. To break the oath is to bring ill time on yourself. Kansu nodded. Right, right. I, Kansu, god of time, youths, and the moon, son of Ra, father of the gods, swear on the sticks that the die used in our game of chance will not and has not be altered in any way by myself or another. I still wouldn't trust him as fair as I can throw him. Hermes claimed. Can't you, throw a house with ease? Leo asked. Quote ellipsis. That's beside the point. The sky boomed and Naruto felt far more respect for this god than he had for few others he'd met. Only his respect for Artemis and Apollo surpassed this, which was understandable as they had raised him. Naruto tightened his grasp around the die and lowered his guard slightly. Bad move, Jason said with a disappointed nod. You never lower your guard with a god you just met. What's your bet? Naruto asked. Kansu grinned and held his hand out. A light appeared over his palm. I wager my Ren, my secret name. The very definition of who or what I am. The key to my soul. Whomever so holds this secret name has control over me, that forces me to do nearly whatever is bidden of me, but not for long. That's. Hazel trailed off in awe. She gulped. Wow, what in the world does he want? That's the most risky thing I've seen a god do in a while. Hades mused, mildly intrigued by the prospect. Have to give the Egyptians this, they're bold ones. Magicians have tried again and again to bind me permanently, but they get greedy. Quote. Kansu closed his hand and grinned as the light dimmed out. I have the feeling that greed isn't your Ren. So we're betting our souls? Naruto asked. Kansu shook his head. No, I'm betting my soul. You're betting your life. Apollo made an iffy gesture with his hand. Not that much of an fair trade. Artemis glared at him, and the god shrugged. What? Nephew he may be, but I calls it like I sees it. Apollo nodded firmly at his defense. The die in Naruto's hand suddenly felt heavier than it was before. We all sense it. All of us, kid. Kansu took a step forward and his eyes seemed pleased when Naruto didn't take a step back. Every immortal that ever was can feel it. Something ain't right. Someone doesn't belong here, in our universe. Kansu put his hand on his chest and his smile grew wide. I just happened to decide to do something about it. He is an error in the system. Leo said in a robot voice. Purge. 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 Leo, stop that. Piper frowned at her friend. He knew she hated those types of movies. Leo grinned innocently at her as a fiery halo appeared above his head. That doesn't help, you know. And if I refuse to play the game? Naruto asked. He rolled the die in his hand, his breathing still. He had an idea of what would happen. I go away and wipe your memory. Kansu shrugged. Wash of the hand, keep an eye on you occasionally if you step out of line. You're wearing my colors as much as you are your mother's. Naruto nodded. Very well. I accept your terms, Kansu. Well, this feels like it's going to end well, Percy said in a chipper tone. That's a bit too optimistic, Percy. Frank mused. Kansu's grin was bright, his teeth spotless, and a gleam appeared in his eyes. One of excitement. Then throw the die, son of Artemis, and call the landing. Naruto looked down at the die in his hand, the moon etched in one side gleamed back up at him. He slipped his thumb under the die and flicked it up. A word escaped Naruto's mouth. The die tumbled in the air. It arched in the air and time seemed to slow as it made its descent. The die landed with a bounce. For a moment, Naruto's heart stopped and his eyes dilated. There was another bounce. Both god and mortal watched the die intently in the faint moonlight. When the die settled, Naruto simply stared at it and Kansu's grin widened. Well, he's dead. Ares folded his arms behind his head. Next story. There's more. Talia argued. What? Boo. Well, there better be a fight. This monologue shit is getting old. The war god grunted. Athena rubbed her eyes tiredly. It helps build characterization. Quote ellipsis. The fuck do I care about that for? Ares? Question made a group of groans break out. Talia didn't know when it happened or how, but she cursed the horde of hellhounds that attacked her, Annabeth and Luke underneath an overpass. It had been 2 months since they left Virginia with little Annabeth, and for the first 3 weeks there weren't that many monsters to follow them. The occasional lone hellhound or two came up, but aside from that, it was almost monster-free. Now though, something had changed. More monsters came after them, a lot more. It was like they'd been doused in eau de monster or something. Hades whistled innocently at this while he admired his wedding ring when Zeus flashed a stern glare at him. Talia used her shield, a replica of Aegis, her father's shield, to bash a hellhound away from her as it made its lunge. She thrust her spear into the hellhound's side and quickly pulled it out to slash another hellhound away. Talia looked over her shoulder towards the two blondes. Luke was doing all right for having only the remains of a bronze sword. His last one had been snapped in half by some sort of snake-legged woman. He faced off against 3 hellhounds while Annabeth finished off one of her own. "Go Annie." Talia grinned at Annabeth, who preened with pride. "I do my best." One that had been wounded beforehand. Smart kid, knew she couldn't take one by herself yet, went for one Luke had wounded. The bashed hellhound took Talia's eyes off of her 2 companions and back on the threat at hand. With a yell, Talia drove her spear into the canine-like monster's open mouth and through the back of its skull. It dispersed into golden dust after she pulled the spear out. Talia turned her attention back on the other hellhounds. There were 2 more that joined the ones that had cornered Luke and Annabeth earlier. "Hey, over here you bastards." Talia shrugged, "It never really does. I learned a few things on the street." Percy agreed with a nod. Annabeth gave him a stern look. "Language that you will never use around me." Right, yeah, of course." The son of Poseidon was quick to say with a nervous smile on his face. "Whipped." Talia whispered with a smirk before she continued. "And let it also be known that hellhounds do not understand the English language." "Yeah they do, you just have to train them to respond correctly." Nico objected. "Well no one asked you, Death Breath." The hunter told the boy. "They do, however, understand that a sound accompanied by ill intent means to move, thus rendering Talia's following surprised attack useless." The hellhound she intended to skewer had moved and Luke had nearly taken the blow, had he not been as riddled with ADHD as she was. "Wow, geez, Talia. Thought the hellhounds were enough of a problem." Luke tried to downplay his own nerves at nearly being killed with weak humor. "Wow, glad to know you got better," Percy said. More like she got worse." Ares shrugged. "She almost saved us from a major problem." Hermes glared at the war god, who had a smirk on his face. "Funny, Castellan, very funny." Talia countered with a scowl as she forced herself to stand on her sprained ankle. Part of the reason Talia didn't accidentally kill Luke was because she adjusted her landing midair, but she landed on her left foot wrong. Talia kept a hellhound at bay with her shield and held her spear up accordingly. Another glance was thrown over her shoulder at the young blonde behind them before her gaze returned to the 4 monsters. "How you holding up, Annie?" No response. "Annie. I got one." Talia smirked. "Atta girl." Talia patted Annabeth on the head. "Little Annie do good. Ha ha." The blonde rolled her eyes and smacked Talia's hand away. "Funny. Well, it was when you were little." Talia sighed dramatically. "Things were a lot easier when you were little, you were cuter and not as sassy." Annabeth stuck her tongue out at Talia. "See? Like that. You'd never do that to me when you were younger. Can you please get back to the story?" Annabeth asked with a frown. Fine. A hellhound seemed to gain some courage as it took a large bite at the air right in front of her shield. Talia sent some static into her spear and sent a large shock at it. The hellhound backed off, but the 3 demigods were cornered. Behind them was a concrete wall, and to either side was a hellhound. Talia and Luke could try to fight them off, maybe even win, but the chance of this occurring was very low. 1 hellhound was easy with 2 demigods. 2 were a bit challenging, but still doable. 3 would be complicated and require a lot of luck. But 4? No chance. "Talia, got any ideas?" Luke asked. Talia swallowed. "None that immediately come to mind." "You fight back. Or misdirection." Hermes mused. "With a wall between them?" Jason asked. Hermes shrugged. "It's doable." "I don't think so," Piper said with a whisper to Jason, who nodded in agreement with her. Well, unless Talia suddenly learned to fly. He figured that wasn't happening anytime soon. Or, possibly, ever. Let's do it. Luke grinned and tightened his grip on his broken sword. You know, I wish I had gotten a backup sword when you said to. Maybe there wouldn't have been 4 hellhounds. Told you last time we stopped, but no, you had to save room for supplies, Talia said. She sent another shock to another hellhound and took a deep breath. Man, that took a lot out of her. Little good that did us. Luke mumbled. He slashed at a hellhound that got too close. The hellhound backed away and snarled at Luke. Saliva dripped from its jaws. Zool, motherfucker. Zool. Nico D'Angelo. You watch your language. Hestia scolded sternly. But it fit perfectly with the scene. Nico protested. Hestia glared at him and he cowed. Sorry. So not funny. Talia scowled at the pale boy. I beg to differ, Nico said with a shrug. Oh, something'll be begging all right. Talia, less threatening, more reading, Artemis said to her lieutenant before another fight could break out. There was a second of peaceful tension, but it was broken as the 4 hellhounds made to move forward. Then, the air filled with snarls and growls was interrupted by the sound of soft clacking. A lone hellhound turned its ears towards the source, but the sound did not deter the others from their slow enclosure. Talia looked towards the source, down in front of Luke's feet. A silver die, with a sun and a moon painted on some of the sides, rested before Luke's right foot. Next to it, was a small scrap of paper, crinkled and partially unrolled. But there was something written on it that Talia surprisingly understood and could barely make out. It was one word, and one word alone. Down. Now that is classy. Apollo grinned with pride. He rubbed the underside of his nose. Undoubtedly something he learned from the coolest uncle he's got. You. Ha. That trajectory was from my tutelage. Artemis argued while her brothers glared mildly at Apollo. Oh. You teach dice to your hunters now. We dabble in different hobbies. The huntress sniffed and said no more of the topic. Her twin pouted at her answer. Now he wanted to know more. Get down. Talia grabbed Annabeth's shoulder and dropped, Luke a step ahead of them, as silver blurs tore through the air towards the 4 hellhounds. The hellhounds couldn't move as they were pierced by something made of silver. The hellhounds slumped to the ground and slowly dissolved into golden dust. All that remained were small silver crescent moons, each no larger than Talia's hand. The faint sound of a lone car passing overhead was the only thing that filled the air for a minute. Someone in awe of a certain hero? Piper asked Talia with a smirk. No. Talia rebuffed quickly. It was freaking cool, that's all. Talia was pretty sure she could hear faint music, but that was probably due to the adrenaline rush. There was a soft thump and a relieved sigh. Good thing you saw the note. I was momentarily afraid it would have been blown off by a gust of wind. Jason smiled. Talia doesn't eat beans. Jason. Talia glared at her brother while her cheeks turned pink. To insinuate she'd pass wind like that. She was the lightning girl. The 3 demigods turned to see a familiar figure in a hooded silver cloak perched behind them. His blue eyes looked them over for a minute before they met Talia's. The eyes dropped and landed on her shield. That thing is still ugly as sin. Talia glowered at him. I didn't exactly have a choice in decorating it, Whiskers. Ah, universal nicknames tilde. McLean, this is a hardback, not a paperback. It will hurt. Piper merely continued to smile in amusement. A groan left the cloaked teen and he pulled his hood down, his face mask still up to conceal the source of his nickname. Can you not call me that? It wasn't like you ever gave us your name. Luke mumbled a bit harshly. Talia realized that was true. Whiskers never gave a name to them. Annabeth called him what Talia called him, and Luke always spoke with eye contact. Whiskers blinked and stood upright. Well, to be fair, you never asked. You only wanted to know if I was a monster and why I could see what you saw since I wasn't a demigod. Wow, not even Annabeth asked him. Hazel teased. Annabeth flushed. I was probably occupied by the comic book. That was also true, Talia noted. They kept Whiskers at arm's length, well, she and Luke did anyway. Annabeth liked him and treasured the comic he'd given her. It was still preserved safely in the girl's gray backpack they'd snagged from a store a few days after they left Richmond. Can we know it now? Annabeth asked as she looked up at the taller blonde. Whiskers looked back at her and stepped down from his perch. His cloak fell around him, concealing his form from real view. You can call me In. I'll give you my name where there aren't any eyes or ears around. In offered. Talia took note of the lack of any bums or people about. All that were present were a few rats that had started to become brave. In walked past the demigods and reached down to pick up the die he'd thrown with his note. In stood and flicked the die into the air with his thumb. He caught it with a quick swipe before his hand disappeared back into his cloak. His eyes went back to them, a scan. Talia grimaced as his gaze fell on her ankle. She was using her spear to keep off of it, but he couldn't know that, right? Ahem. Both Artemis and Apollo cleared their throats. He's not born with your genes. Talia grumbled. Thankfully, she added mentally. I most likely trained him to have keen eyesight, Talia. He'd know how to look for details. The moon goddess said. And I would have showed him a few things with medical stuff. I would be a bad uncle otherwise. You are one regardless. Artemis huffed and Apollo glared at her. Well, maybe if you gave me a legit niece, heck, make it a real nephew. I could show you how awesome of an uncle I'd be. And I've told you, until all the stars in the sky blink out. Twins, that's enough. Hestia sighed as she rubbed her head, she felt like she needed an aspirin. The twins went silent, but Artemis continued to glare at Apollo, while he made a face at her in return. Luke, you know Connecticut well, right? And asked. Talia and Annabeth looked to the other blonde boy, who had a dark look on his face. How do you know that? You gave me your first name. You didn't think that runaways were exempt from being reported missing, did you? Took me a while, but I found you, Annabeth, and even the damaged lightning rod, here. Naruto nodded to Talia. Talia was miffed that he wasn't really affected by her glare for making Annabeth and Luke aware of her injury. If you know where I used to live, why ask if I know Connecticut well? Luke asked with a scowl on his face. Well, this will only end in tears, Hermes said with an extremely forced smile. In arched a brow and amusement seemed to twinkle in his eyes. I might know, I might not. But I know that I know you remember where you live. N's gaze became distant and sad. No one forgets where they come from, after all. He needs a mommy hug. Hazel whispered to Frank. We all need those once in a while. Her boyfriend agreed. Luke's scowl deepened and he turned away slightly. Fine, but stay close. You should carry Annabeth. In said. I can run, Whiskers. Annabeth frowned at him. Talia snorted while In sent her a quick glare. He really didn't like that nickname, it seemed. N's eyes became amused and gentle once more as he knelt down to look at her. We need you to save your energy, Annabeth. We're all so tired and need our little wise girl to keep an eye out for more monsters. Wow, dealing with a younger you is so easy. Percy mumbled in awe while Annabeth glared at him. See. Way better as a kid, Annie. Talia agreed with her cousin. I like to be a grown-up, unlike some girl I know. Hey. It's part of the gig. Talia had to fight down the smile that crossed her face as Annabeth seemed to be swayed by N's logic. She watched Luke begrudgingly pick the smaller blonde up in a piggyback ride and start to walk off. Talia looked back at N as he walked up to her and her gaze hardened. You so much as asked to carry me. Hey. Talia cried out as N picked her up over his shoulders in a fireman's carry. Bring back to cave. Ares grunted like a caveman. Really? Aphrodite asked. While the wording was slightly amusing, it was also just stupidly sad. Ares just scratched under his armpit and she sighed. A banana then hit him in the face and he looked around, enraged. Who did that? Hermes whistled innocently as he kicked the rest of the bananas under Percy's seat. Didn't ask. There was a smirk under that mask, Talia just knew it. Talia scowled and collapsed her weapons with a huff. You're a jerk, Whiskers. I've been told this before. And stop calling me that. Naruto had, at Talia's request, stopped to reposition her to be carried like Annabeth was. Inhaling his hair made the young impressionable demi-goddess release a content sigh as she nestled into his strong, broad shoulders. Stop that. Talia snapped at the love goddess, who had mimicked Talia's voice perfectly. The Lady of Doves tittered and waved the hunter off. Oh, let me have this. It was before your mind was poisoned. I don't poison minds, you do with your foam-filled brain. Artemis sneered at Aphrodite. We all use different poisons. Aphrodite countered with a smirk. It was far less humiliating that way, and it was a lot easier for Naruto, too. He could keep up with Luke and not be subjected to Talia's complaints. They traveled in relative quiet through a small town until they came across a white colonial house that looked almost lonely by where it was placed on the street. Luke stepped up the porch to the door and let Annabeth slide down his back to the ground before he crouched in front of the door. Picking the lock of your own house? Naruto asked as he let Talia slip down from his back carefully. He continued to let her use him for support while he watched Luke work. Luke paused and looked back at the other blonde. There's a reason I ran off. Whoa, Herm, ease up on the face. Apollo told his brother, whose forced smile became wider. I think it's stuck. Hermes patted his face with a bit of concern in his eye, despite the smile he had. Fair enough. Naruto shrugged. Hey, he said he looked the kids up, not that he read their whole files. That would be an invasion of privacy. Luke got the door open in a few seconds and ushered them in quickly. He shut the door and turned, only to find their backs to him. Guys, what are you waiting for? We can't stay long. No, by all means. Luke looked up at the one that obstructed their path. A man in a navy jogging suit stood before them. He had salt and peppered hair, with blue eyes that were akin to Luke's own. A smile spread across his face. Have a seat. Get comfortable. I think he wants to play a game. Leo mused with a raised brow. Quick, Athena brat, turn Castellan's hands into stumps. Ares ordered gleefully. Oh, god damn it. Naruto mumbled. He'd recognized the being by Apollo in his mother's descriptions of the lax apparel that would often be worn on a day, or second, off. The patron of thieves, Hermes, stood before them. Watch your mouth, there's children present. Hermes told him firmly. He turned and walked into the living room, pausing to look over his shoulder. Luke, come with me. We need to talk. He's been a bad boy. Leo tisked. He wasn't that bad. Hermes grumbled while he rubbed the salve Apollo gave him to relax his smile on his cheeks. Athena sent Hermes a bland look. He almost managed to destroy Olympus. Like I said, he wasn't that bad. If he was that bad, he would have destroyed Olympus. Yeah, Luke agreed. Naruto stole a glance as the other blonde teen walked past and saw white knuckles formed by the clenching of his fists. This was only going to end in tears. Ares took a drink from a bottle that was labeled Hermes Tears. Ah, delicious. Hermes pointed at the bottle in alarm. Where did you get those? I have my sources. Naruto led Talia and Annabeth to the kitchen, where Talia sat at an island countertop on a stool. Annabeth sat next to her and her eyes widened at the sight of a mountain of cookies that was on it. Her hand reached out to grab one, but Naruto's hand was faster. Annabeth recoiled and held her hand that had been slapped as she looked at the other blonde with a pout. No cookies for you, it seems, Reina chuckled at her friend. Hey, we were hungry that day. Annabeth weakly retorted. Your lack of manners shows that. Annabeth merely pouted at her past actions being criticized. She was 7. Don't be rude. Ask for permission first. Naruto looked at the other occupant of the kitchen. A wiry woman with white hair that seemed to slowly be falling out. She looked almost like a scarecrow. Hello, children. The woman greeted with a smile on her face. My name is May. Hello, Ms. Castellan, Naruto said softly as he pulled his mask down. He took a seat next to Talia and forced her to turn towards him so he could look at her ankle. This is Talia and next to her is Annabeth. My name is Naruto. Talia arched a brow, a smirk on her face. Really? That's a weird name, Whiskow. Talia glowered at this. This is why you don't get smart with the white mage. Apollo snickered and steepled his fingers together. We hold power over resurrection and healing. Fear us. Naruto gave her a look as he tested the functionality of her injured foot. Sprained. Nothing too severe, but walking on it could have cost you in the long run. He turned to May with a gentle smile on his face. Excuse me, Ms. Castellan, but do you have any ambrosia or ice I could use? Annabeth furrowed her brows. Where would she get ambrosia? I don't think it would be responsible to leave it in the house with her. Athena commented offhandedly. She's fine, Hermes said frostily. Naruto ignored the question as Mei smiled, her clouded eyes gained some light to them. She walked over to the refrigerator and opened the door. What a polite boy. That reminds me of the time my son, Luke, and I went to get some ice cream. Oh, he was so precious when he was little. Nervous as a tick when he asked for Rocky Road from the pretty girl behind the counter. Like his father, he was a little ladies' man in the making. And a shame, too. Aphrodite nodded mournfully. Luke had such potential. But no, he had to moon over a tree girl. Oh the woe. Talia's eye twitched while Artemis rolled her eyes. A tray of ice was pulled out and a jar of slightly golden liquid was set on the table. Talia looked at Naruto with confusion written on her face and Naruto softly whispered, with the traveler here, one can assume that she's more aware of things than we think. Would you like some Kool-Aid, sweetie? Mei asked Annabeth. A cookie perhaps? Sure, Annabeth said uneasily as the cloudy eyes met hers. A cup was set before her and red liquid, poorly mixed if those clumps were anything to go by, was poured in. The cookie Annabeth had tried to snag beforehand was greeted by a grimace as she showed the bottom of the snack to the older demigods. Burnt like it had been cooked for too long. Annabeth gave them a pleading look and silently mouthed, "Can we go now?" Naruto frowned at her slightly. Manners. Yeah. Talk about rude. Hermes frowned at Annabeth, who refused to meet the god's eyes. The young daughter of Athena pouted unhappily as Mei started to make a new batch of cookies and talked about Luke's childhood. Naruto paid it no mind and returned to his treatment. He rubbed some ambrosia and ice around the ankle with a napkin and had Talia take a sip of the former. While Mei had their attention with a gripping tale of Luke's first few days of potty training, that boy did not want to be in diapers or limited to one spot when he did his business, apparently. The tales of the traveling pooper. How riveting, Athena said, with distaste evident on her features. She could have gone without hearing that idea. Hey, Apollo snapped his fingers. That'd be an awesome kid's book. Apollo gave the smirking Hermes a scathing glare. You dick. You gotta be faster, Apollo. The smirking thief god wagged a finger at the sun god. Dash. Naruto pressed his hand over the ankle and closed his eyes. After he'd thought of some words to use, Naruto began to sing softly, not with the best voice in the world, but it wasn't bad either, in Greek. It was a trick used mostly by his cousins, to sing to Apollo to heal another, but Apollo told him that it really didn't have to be his kids that sang. He'd accept a request made by anyone that was singing about him. Yes, to swell his ego, Artemis said dryly. His mother said it was due to his ego. Artemis' lip quirked upward. Indeed, she had raised a smart boy. Who'd have thought? Apollo never disagreed when Naruto asked if it was true. Mei ignored the song, going to a story about Luke picking a locker in school, but Talia and Annabeth stared at Naruto curiously. He sang too softly for them to really catch, with Mei's chatter taking up most of the sound. By the time Naruto had finished, he had released Talia's leg and let her walk around on it for a second. How'd you do that? Talia asked with a curious and wary frown. She started to pull her sock and shoe back on while Annabeth stared in genuine curiosity. I didn't know Annabeth had a foot fetish. Piper. Annabeth exclaimed with red cheeks, clearly scandalized at the thought. The daughter of love snickered, Hazel barely held in her giggles, and Reina had an amused smile while Percy gave Annabeth a playful wary look as he moved his feet away from hers. Old trick my uncle taught me. Wasn't sure if it would work, Naruto said with a shrug. He covered the lid on the ambrosia and handed it back to Mei. Thank you, Ms. Castellan. Mei smiled back at him. No problem, dearie. Then you don't care. And thus, the near end of the world came to be, all because Hermes is a crappy pops. Ares grunted as he cleaned his ear with his pinky finger. Real pity. I didn't nearly start the end of the world. Hermes strongly rebuffed and pointed at Hades. He cursed the oracle. Because he, Hades gestured to Zeus, killed my lover. We've done this whole song and dance, Hermes. At least try to add a new spin to it. If not, drop it. Hermes kept himself from glowering and held his tongue while Zeus gave Hades a glare. Eyes went to the hall as Luke's shout echoed in the house. Naruto winced. Yeah, this was going to end badly. Eyes went to Mei, who had stopped stirring and set the bowl of cookie mix down. Luke, is that you? Her voice was worried, hopeful, and elated. Is that my boy? The poor dear. Hera sighed while she rested a hand on her forehead. It was a saddening fate for a mother. Luke ran from the living room and left the house. Annabeth was quick on his heels and Talia was right on hers. Naruto stood from his seat and pulled his mask back up. He watched as the elderly woman moved from the kitchen to the door in a speed one would not expect of her. Luke. Luke, come back. My boy. Tears fell down her cheeks. Hermes was behind her. He had her in an embrace one would not expect a god to use when they kept a mortal from chasing after demigods. Naruto slipped by and pulled his hood up. He turned back and his eyes locked with the gods for a brief moment before he looked at the sobbing May. Miss Castellan, thank you for all your help. My boy. May wailed. Naruto turned and ran off towards the woods that the other three had run to. There were clouds forming overhead and the moon was being hidden from sight. Symbolism. Talia asked her matron. Well, who knows? Artemis quirked her lips up. She was very curious as to how the coming reunion would be with her son. Naruto took one last look at the Castellan house, the image of the worried mother driven to tears burned in his mind. He turned back towards the shadows of the wilderness and embraced them. Humans and immortals, so different and so very much alike. We don't advertise it that much, Dionysus said, before he took a sloppy sip of his coke and then belched. Aphrodite gave the god a disgusted look. Do you wish to scratch your rear for a trifecta of disgusting? Good idea. The wine god smiled and did as such. Dionysus. Zeus groaned and covered his eyes painfully. Would you like to talk about it? Naruto asked that night. Luke was too worked up to sleep and had told Talia and Annabeth that he'd take first watch. Annabeth had asked what Hermes was like, and Luke almost flipped had Talia not pulled Annabeth aside and offered to read the comic with her again before bed. Percy looked at his girlfriend with a small smirk. You don't have it memorized yet. Sometimes I like to read something just for the sake of reading, Percy. Annabeth informed factually. What do you care? Luke asked bitterly. You're not a demigod. I am not a demigod, but I know what it's like to feel betrayed by your father. Naruto added. It's not the same. Luke grumbled. And this was Luke's problem, he thought he had it so bad. Talia grumbled. Sure, her turning into a tree sucked, but he could have just moved on with his life and look at the positive things he had going for it. Instead, like an idiot, he had to focus on all the negative. Annabeth placed a comforting hand on Talia's shoulder and the two girls shared a soft smile. They'd still remember Luke when he was their Luke, and not the teen that wanted to destroy Olympus. Naruto sighed. It looked like he'd have to start this conversation if he was to make any headway. My birth mother died the night I was born. My father was nowhere to be found. It wasn't complications in birth that killed her. According to my adoptive mother, my birth mother was riddled in cuts and gashes. She held on long enough to give me my name. Your name? Luke asked. Naruto looked at him from the corner of his eye. Naruto. It means maelstrom or fish cake in Japanese, depending on how it's written. He explained. There's probably another meaning for it, but that's what I know. Do you know who your father is? Luke asked. Naruto shook his head. Don't know, don't care. If I ever meet him in this world or the next, I'm going to punch him square in the face. A very well-planned idea. Artemis agreed with a proud smile on her face. No. The boy really is a male Artemis. Aphrodite cried. She was actually close to tears over this development. I need to get him with some girls, stat. I'm sure that my other's working on that. Apollo waved off Aphrodite's concern. He wanted a male Artemis just as much as Artemis wanted a female Apollo. They best not corrupt him. Artemis threatened the two with a glare. If your alternate selves so much as try, I'm taking my frustration out on you too. Ellipsis. My, Artemis, this is so sudden tilde. Aphrodite said coyly. She batted her eyelashes while she placed a hand on her chest. Do be gentle with me. Though, I do like it rough now and again tilde. Artemis, cheeks dusted gold and she scowled at the goddess. Not that kind of frustration, you harlot. Hot. Hermes whispered as he thought about the action mentioned by the two goddesses, exchange. Apollo threw a rock at his head and glared at the other gods. His twin was off limits unless she decided otherwise, and like the good big brother he was, Apollo would help her keep unwanted suitors away. Read, Talia, read. Piper urged, looking slightly ill at her mother's antics. How do you know you're not a demigod? Luke asked. My mother, the one that adopted and raised me, has experience with demigods. She's very worldly. Naruto smiled softly as Luke narrowed his eyes. How does she have experience with demigods? Luke asked. She's very worldly. Big time, like this one time when we were in Mississippi. Talia, ixnay on the Mississippi May. Artemis whispered out, having calmed down somewhat from Aphrodite's ghastly advances. Oh, right. Talia nodded before she continued. You could say she's clear-sighted, too. Naruto chuckled. Far better sight than I have. Anyone, really. Quote. Why haven't gods gone after her, then? Luke asked. Artemis scoffed. They tried, but learned. I can still feel them, all of them. Hermes whispered with a haunted look on his face while he rubbed his rear. Naruto smirked. My uncle is very protective of her. He's got wicked aim and a bit of a sadistic streak to him. Almost killed a guy for making a pass at her. Quote. And this would scare a god? Luke asked in disbelief. Apollo smiled brightly. Bitch, I scare people. Why do you think people wear brown pants? For fashion. Piper dared to ask, getting a squeal of joy from her mother. Because of me, the sun god answered, as if he didn't even hear the girl. Naruto grinned, a feral-like smirk plastered on his face under his mask. Gods are smart. They know a bad idea when they see it. Going after my mother, possibly the worst idea imaginable. Quote. Your family sounds awesome. Luke commented. Hermes threw his hands in the air. Thank you. Naruto looked up at the sky. They've got faults too, though. Mom doesn't like a lot of guys and her adopted daughters, my sisters, aren't fans, either. I left because it made them uncomfortable. And because it was against old laws. Unless he chops it off, he's out. Talia threw her thumb over her shoulder like an umpire. Quote ellipsis. Seriously? Leo asked with a gulp. Or I could change you into a girl. Artemis grinned at the demigod. Care to try, Leo Valdez? Oh, I don't think girly parts would look good on me, Leo said with a nervous laugh. But Leo, Piper smiled. It's what on the inside that counts. Chica, you're scaring me. Leo made a cross with his fingers and leaned away from her when she leaned in towards him. That sucks. Luke frowned. Couldn't they have gotten over it? Naruto shrugged. Maybe. Doubt it. Doesn't matter. I decided to leave with my uncle. He couldn't stay with me long, though. He's got a job that keeps him away. Well, at least you don't have monsters after you. Luke joked. Naruto reached into his pocket and pulled out his die. He looked it over and his eyes became hard. Yeah, no monsters. Cool die. Where'd you get it? Luke asked. Picked it up when I was tracking you guys down. Naruto flicked it into the air and caught it. Was getting bored and figured being in a group of demigods would be better than running around Richmond pretending to be a superhero. Luke frowned. His guard went up like rock walls at Naruto's comment. Quote. So, what exactly spurred on this get-up? Naruto looked at his die. I wanted to make a difference. Starting line of every superhero ever. Apollo nodded while Artemis frowned slightly. Don't they usually get crippled by their traumas in the wear of their job? I don't think it's healthy in the long run. The moon goddess objected slightly. Come on, he's cool like this though. Talia told her lady. You say that because your other likes him. Or because you have a thing for blondes with blue eyes. Hypocrite. Talia accused while she glared at the goddess of love's daughter. Piper snuggled against Jason. I know what I like and freely admit it, Tilda. And keep my home safe. Quote. And now? Luke asked. Naruto looked at him. A soft light appeared in his eyes. I felt some other kids needed to find a home, too. Luke fought the smile that spread across his face for a moment before he held his hand out. Glad to have you. Luke Castellan. Naruto looked at the hand for a moment before he pocketed his die and took hold of it. Naruto, but my legal name is Nathan Blank. Blah Ank. Percy rolled the name across his tongue and frowned. That's a terrible last name. It's empty. That's kind of the point, I would guess. He doesn't know his last name. Hazel reminded him. Still, he could have picked something with pep. Nico commented. Says the cheerleader himself. Talia rolled her eyes. Die. Talia cried out as she stabbed another hellhound in the head. It had been a few months since the mortal had joined up with them. A few months? Percy asked with a blink. He turned to his girlfriend with a confused frown. I thought it was a single summer, not a year, that you guys met up. Well, keeping track of the days was hard. Plus I was a kid. Annabeth defended herself with a light blush. Talia shrugged. I didn't care, it could have been years for all I know. Sure felt like it. Percy just looked confused as hell by this. He had so many questions and that didn't help at all. Naruto kept to the shadows mostly and was great when it came to deciding where one should camp. More sleep-filled nights were had than if they had been without him. He was also good at finding weapons and supplies. Something about tricks his mother and sisters taught him. Ah, he's already prepping you for the hunt, Talia. Annabeth giggled. Are you? Talia shot back. Not happening. Ever. The wisdom child retorted. She grinned. Percy rewarded her loyalty with a peck on the cheek. A silver arrowhead flew inches from Talia's head, over her shoulder and into a jumping hellhound's eye socket. The guy was a natural survivor and he made up for what she and Luke lacked, a ranged support. Naruto was an ace shot with his thrown weapons. Talia didn't know when the guy slept, but it had to be less than an hour each night. Seriously, the amount of times Naruto saved the demigods' lives in their sleep was surprisingly high. Things that go bump in the night. Hazel nudged Nico with her elbow. Stop that. That creepy voice is overrated. Nico grumbled. He worked hard on that one. Will helped, too. They just keep coming, Talia said in tired outrage. This was the fifth pack that had attacked them that night, and without looking, Talia knew Luke was on his last legs, too. She frowned as he stumbled and narrowly escaped a hellhound's swipe with its front paw. Luke had been getting a bit more reckless. He'd attacked most monsters he could lay his eyes on, and in another time, it would have driven him and Talia to exhaustion, near death. Each survival would have made them closer than they already were before. Now, with a third and, begrudgingly admitted, more talented fighter. Ouch, I can hear her ego crying from that one. Percy sniggered. He's got better aim than you'll ever have, wethead. Talia grunted irritably. Oh, I know my aim sucks. I'm not afraid to admit stuff like that. Percy snarked, which got Talia to release a bit of static in annoyance. Even if it might have been, just a little bit, honestly, true. It had only made her increasingly agitated with the boy. Naruto had tried to explain that the run-in with Hermes had made Luke unsettled, that there were just some things one had to figure out for themselves, but Talia wouldn't buy it. Luke didn't think before he acted when he saw a monster. He didn't consider his, hers or even Annabeth's safety when they fought a monster. The girl in question was back with Naruto, close enough that he could grab her if needed, but able to hold her own against a hellhound. Her tactics got better with each night, and that could be attributed to Naruto's knowledge of hunting. Mom likes to hunt. Naruto explained when asked how he knew all of this. It was a simple way of life. You could call her a naturalist, I guess. Talia found it odd when he never gave a name to the woman he called Mom. There was a sister he mentioned a lot, Zoe, but they never got an exact name for his mother. They knew his Uncle Fred through some zany stories about trips to Japan or China. Frankly, Talia thought Uncle Fred was a perv. Artemis opened with a slow clap and then sped up. Bravo Talia, excellent eye on that detail. Oh, ha ha ha, make fun of me all you want. Sticks and stones. Apollo huffed with his nose in the air. Yay. Ares beamed and lifted up a big stone and a club. No, Zeus absent-mindedly denied his warmonger of a son. Ah. Ares whined as he dropped his toys to the ground with thuds. With all the women that would come up in the stories, but kept those to herself out of respect for the boy that traveled with them, but got no hints to his mother. Ms. Blank was an apt name, as Talia couldn't think of anything else to call the woman other than Naruto's mom. There's another pack coming. Naruto's warning came along with the howls of more hellhounds. Talia grimaced. There were too many. She and Luke were exhausted. Hell, Talia could barely manage a single spark by the third pack of hellhounds. Annabeth could barely handle one hellhound, and Naruto was probably low on silver. We can handle it. Luke managed to get out as he cut another hellhound down. It's got to be the last group. And thus, they were eaten alive by the wave after the last group. Nico declared, before his head bowed. Good night, sweet prince, thou truly a fool. Apollo clapped slowly. It was good. Thanks. Nico smiled. Though you could use a few tweaks. I suggest the drama course at camp. Works wonders for a kid's acting career. I know people. Hades told his son. Nico hummed, mildly intrigued by this. Nico in showbiz. Percy whispered to Jason. Jason shrugged, he didn't even know what to think about it. Luke, there's too many. Naruto sounded closer than before and Talia caught sight of him. His cloak was gone, torn to shreds earlier when the third pack nearly flanked them. Like herself and Luke, Naruto had cuts on his body from the hellhound's claws getting too close. The mask around his face was ripped slightly on the left, the side that faced her, and revealed one of his whisker marks. We need to run. Annabeth agreed from where she clung to Naruto's back. Her leg had a large cut on it and Talia saw the younger girl blink away the tears. Annie, you okay? Talia asked. She turned and stabbed another hellhound with her spear. A final lunged at her but was nailed in the side of the skull by a silver arrowhead. Talia glowered at Naruto before she looked to the younger blonde on his back. I'm okay, just hurts a bit. The admittance was quiet, but at least she was honest. Acting tough was stupid, even when supplies were limited. Naruto made that clear when Luke got a gash in his arm and tried to brush it off. Would you rather die because you were so stubborn that you bled out, or would you like to ensure that we all make it to the next safe house? I'm glad to see he inherited the blunt honesty. Apollo smiled at his twin. You learn so well from your big bro. Artemis scoffed. Your influence means nothing with how I act. Except how much of a pig you can be. But I love being a ham. Apollo declared proudly. Hermes, who was eating some bacon, nodded in agreement. It's true, he makes the best bacon. It's smoked over my engine. Apollo shone with pride. Natural sunlight is the best cooker, ever. Naruto was curt, but not unkind. He genuinely cared about all of them, even though he was a bit distant. It was like he expected them to leave him behind sometime. Glad to hear it. Talia nodded. She looked at Luke as he finished off his hellhound. They looked at the last pack that was heading towards them. Luke steadied his ground and Talia glared at him. Luke, come on. I can catch up. Luke called over to them. He sounded just as exhausted as Talia felt. Naruto gave an annoyed grunt. Oh, now he wants to be the... Naruto stopped abruptly and turned to the woods behind them. He hissed out a swear that Talia felt was a bit too inappropriate for Annabeth's ears. What's that mean? Annabeth asked. Artemis glowered at Apollo. Did you teach him that? What? No. Scout's honor. Apollo swore. It must have been one of your hunters, humph. What? They would never. Apollo pointed to Talia. Foul-mouthed girl, number one. My language is not that bad. Talia grumbled to refute her use as an example. No, it was you. It's always you. Artemis sneered at Apollo. The sun god turned to Zeus and pointed at his twin. Dad. Artemis is picking me for no reason again. Apollo cried. The moon goddess pointed at Apollo as she looked at the king. Father, make him admit it. Enough. Stop acting like children. Zeus ordered as he glared at the two. If this continues I will ground you, Artemis, and I'll worsen your punishment, Apollo. The twins pouted and slumped down in their thrones unhappily, both of them pouting and crossing their arms over their chests. Zeus rubbed his face and glared at his amused brothers. Tell you when you're older, Talia said as she frowned at the older boy. What? I need to leave. Luke should come with me. Naruto mumbled. Talia narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? Naruto shook his head. Never mind. It's too late. He crouched down and slipped Annabeth from his back. Annie, stand next to Talia. Do you hear it? Talia held a hand to her ear. They come. Like creatures of the night, it's the bad groupies. Nico mumbled lowly. Naruto didn't tear his eyes from the forest. Annabeth, just do it. The force he used behind his order had Annabeth back away and stumble into Talia. The older girl let Annabeth keep her weight off of her leg and they watched as Naruto turned towards the hellhounds. He reached behind him and pulled a large, silver arrowhead from his back pouch. It was easily large enough to fit on a pole to make a spear. Run to the forest. Naruto softly instructed. Luke and I will cover you. What? Okay, why were boys so stupid? I have a simple answer for that. Artemis smiled and cleared her throat as a very long parchment appeared in her hands. I have written a thesis on it with the aid of Athena. Always willing to help further education. The wisdom goddess smirked. Indeed. Now, first and foremost. Oh gods, Talia said under her breath in horror. She had heard this speech once, she didn't want to hear it again. She turned and looked at the goddess with a nervous smile. Lady Artemis, can you save it for later? I'm sort of reading here. Artemis frowned and her paper vanished. Very well, then I will read it after this chapter. Or never. The males mumbled. They did not need nor desired to hear a feminist bashing on their gender. Talia scowled and opened her mouth to call them both idiots, but she stopped when Naruto's eyes met hers. Cold orbs of ice had replaced the warm ocean blues that once rested in his eyes. I said go. Talia frowned and put her shield away. She let Annabeth climb onto her back and started to back up. Luke looked at her over his shoulder. What are you waiting for? Get going. Talia grit her teeth and turned to run. She ignored Annabeth's questions about the two idiots she'd left behind. Talia was mere feet from the woods when the first arrow shot over her shoulder. She came to a stop and dropped to the ground. Talia pulled Annabeth around and covered her with her own body. Fire. A voice called from the woods before more arrows shot from them. There were pained howls and the sound of brush being moved. There were more arrows fired. It sounded like someone had just decided to rip a bunch of cardboard at once, and even more howls. Da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, 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 da da tilde. Ares sang out, almost beautifully. If only for not that cruel gleefulness in his voice that is. He cackled cruelly. Die, die, die. Wrong theme. Zeus frowned at his son for using the infamous song based on Norse mythology. Still a good tune. The war god argued with a wave of his hand. Talia kept down and quiet until a hand placed itself on her shoulder. Hey there. The voice was gentle and feminine, and caused Talia to look up. A girl her age or maybe a year older smiled down at her. Her hair was brown and green eyes looked down at her with care. Oddly enough, like Naruto, the girl was clad in a silver cloak. I'm Melissa, are you all right? Talia. Talia decided after a minute. She got up with Annabeth and looked at the young blonde's injured leg. I'm fine, but she needs some bandages. Wow, at least it's a shallow cut. Talia come with. Milady. A voice called from behind Talia. Talia and Melissa turned to see two other girls coming back from the clearing. Behind them, Luke followed with a frown on his face. His sword was in one of the girls' hands, but they were down a person. Naruto wasn't with them. Well, someone doesn't want to see mommy. I can only wonder why. Aphrodite asked mockingly, a pointed look thrown to the huntress. Artemis kept her face straight, but inwardly frowned. Why did he run away? Was he that upset with her for forcing him to leave? The girl that had called out was taller and a bit older than Talia and looked a bit like a Persian princess with that dumb tiara on her head. She came to a stop in front of a younger girl, around 12 or 13 if Talia had to guess, with dark auburn hair pulled back into a ponytail. She had a circlet of her own on her head, with a familiar symbol in the middle of her forehead. A crescent moon. Mama Arte is in the house. Apollo whooped as Artemis rolled her eyes at her twin's hyper attitude. She will judge you for being associated with Naruto. Leo told Talia. No she won't. Talia scoffed and looked at Artemis. Right. Artemis tapped her chin, her lips forming a teasing smile. Perhaps and perhaps not. Talia felt nervous for her other now. Talia stared at the moon and found herself distracted long enough before she registered the conversation as the older girl spoke with the younger. Are you sure? He was here. The older girl urgently mumbled. She held her hand out and a glint of silver caught Talia's eye. The younger girl took the object from the older's hand with a small frown on her face. Her eyes, cold and bright like the moon above them, looked it over before she clenched it tightly in her grasp. She looked back at the taller girl. Come along, Melissa said as she took Annabeth into her arms and turned. We have started to set camp for the night. You'll be safe with us. Talia strained her ears as she, Annabeth and Luke were led away. A hunter with, find him and end. It was gone, they were too far. Talia scowled and looked at Luke. Where's in? Don't know. Luke muttered under his breath. He looked pissed. 1 second he's there fighting hellhounds with me, and the next he's gone. He might have said something, but I was too busy to hear him. Next thing I know, bunch of arrows made of silver are falling from the sky and taking out the hellhounds. Luke looked at the girl that led him. Thanks, by the way. Spare us your gratitude, Melissa said with a scowl. Talia frowned, that was an abrupt turnaround. If you wanted to thank us, you should have stepped. Melissa. Another girl, this one with yellow hair like straw and sky blue eyes snapped. She stepped up and tossed Luke a roll of bandages and a bottle. Here. Fix yourself up, boy. Ah, the hunter bedside manner. Glad to see that it's still the same, even then. Percy nodded to himself. I know, it was like a 5-star hotel. Leo snorted in agreement. Talia grunted. I'm working on it, thank you very much. It was nicer than Melissa, but it was still a bit harsh. Talia frowned as the girl sat them down and took care of Annabeth's cut. She took a glance at some of the surrounding girls and noted their glares directed at Luke, who shifted uneasily as he treated a cut on his shoulder. What's your problem? Talia asked the one that was helping Annabeth. What did Luke do to you guys? He has done nothing, yet. He will, I'm sure. Melissa answered scornfully. So, do we make donations, or do we gotta do a funny dance to not get the death glares from hunters? Leo asked Talia. He gave her 2 thumbs up and a winning grin. Because I do a mean Macarena. Jason pulled at his pockets and found nothing but lint. I might have to join him. Oh please, do so, Piper said, barely holding back her giggles. We do accept donations, but it does not lessen any hate for the lesser sex. Artemis told the boys. She says it so casually. Frank murmured to Percy. The son of Poseidon shrugged. You get used to it, I think. She seems chill with me at least. You saved her life, Nico dryly said. Of course she'd be chill with you. The one treating Annabeth stopped and frowned at her. Melissa, isn't there a watch you need to join? Melissa huffed and walked off while the girl that was assisting Annabeth looked at Talia. We are the hunters of Artemis. That certainly cleared up the questions in Talia's head. More were raised, though. Like what were those 2 hunters talking about? How did Naruto know the hunters were here? How did he know about the hunters at all? Why did Naruto disappear and leave Luke to the hellhounds? Because he didn't want to get grounded, Apollo said as if it was obvious. Arte's a cruel grounder, let me tell you. Poor Megan. Talia shook her head. She wondered if Artemis had changed her back from a squirrel after setting off that prank on her when it had been meant for Stacy. And the biggest question, where was Naruto now? Ow, ow, ow. Naruto hissed as he pulled a silver arrowhead out of his side slowly and carefully. He was seated against a tree at least a mile from the clearing. Or, at least, he hoped it was a mile. Naruto didn't exactly want to be found by the hunters. That wasn't a reunion he wanted to have. Ever. Harsh. Apollo whispered loudly, only to be swatted at by a frowning Artemis. Why did they have to hit him? The goddess muttered to herself. They were supposed to have keen aim. Unless they were aiming for him. Oh, for the love of the moon. Artemis palmed herself in the head. First things first, he needed to get the arrow out of him before he bled out or it got infected. Naruto reached into his pouch and pulled out one of his crescent moon shuriken. He used it like a plier, giving a hiss as he opened the wound to grab the arrowhead. Carefully, he dislodged the projectile from his side. It wasn't without a scream that the arrow left his body. Naruto took heavy breaths and pressed his hand against his side. He grit his teeth and used his other hand to pull his second pouch around. He always had small quick fix supplies in this one. After a bit of digging, Naruto found what he needed. A needle and thread. He grimaced. This was going to hurt like hell. He could sing a hymn to me. Apollo pouted. He was the awesome uncle with the hookup. Well, hopefully his other at least taught the boy to properly stitch a wound so he didn't end up like Frankenstein D'Angelo. Ouch, that looks painful. Naruto looked up and glowered at the one that smiled down at him. Kansu. Naruto grumbled. Not in the mood for your crap right now. Kansu gained a wounded frown and put his hand on his chest. Ouch, that hurts me right here, Naruto. I thought we were friends. We're not. Naruto grit out as he tried to thread the needle with one hand. It did not go well. You know, I could help you with that, Kansu said nonchalantly. Thanks, but I'll pass. There's no such thing as a free lunch, Naruto said through gritted teeth. Amen. All the demigods agreed to that. Kansu frowned. You're no fun. Bite me. Now that's just rude. Kansu crossed his arms over his chest and his necklaces gleamed in the moonlight. He watched Naruto struggle with the needle and thread for another minute before he sighed. Now this is just sad. Shish, we're reveling in his struggle. Ares grinned. Or at least the war god was, he didn't care what the others were thinking. He snapped his fingers and the needle became threaded. Kansu pointed at the wound and the needle began to stitch up the gash. Naruto grit his teeth and his nails dug into the ground. It took a few minutes, but the wound was stitched shut. There, don't say I never did anything nice for you, Kansu said with a smirk. That'll cost you half a lung, Hermes said as he read from a clipboard. He offered it to Frank with a smile on his face. Just sign the bottom line. No thanks. The son of Mars nervously refused. Damn. Hermes clicked his tongue and pulled the clipboard back. They're learning. Naruto grimaced. What do you want? Nothing. Yet, anyway. Just came to check up on you. While the hunters were on my trail. Naruto asked dryly. Kansu's smirk dimmed. They cannot find you, Naruto. She will know of our interactions. You should leave as soon as possible. Naruto shook his head stubbornly. I can't leave the others behind. Kansu pursed his lips before he sighed and scratched the back of his head. Alright, well I tried to warn you. Might as well let you know that another is on your tail aside from the hunters. What? Artemis sucked in air through her teeth. Ooh, a real fight scene. Ares smiled widely. Then what were the last ones? Talia asked her half-brother rudely. Meh, not entertaining. Ares waved the hunter off. Naruto looked at the Egyptian god sharply. Another what? Tell us. Percy declared with his fist in the air. A bedtime story. Apollo innocently asked with a child's book in his hands. And no, what the thing after Naruto is. Percy said lamely. Great, there went his epic moment. He should find you sometime soon. Kansu continued without acknowledging Naruto's question. Word of advice, don't bring up the subject of your mother or father. He'll never shut up about it. Hot-tempered, that one. Kansu dusted his sleeve off and looked up. Huh, would you look at that? An hour passed. How time flies. Naruto grimaced as Kansu faded from view. As a god of time, he could control the flow of time. When they first met, Kansu had frozen their small place in time so they could converse. It had set Naruto a week behind the trio of demigods he followed, before he caught up to them again. It seemed this time, Kansu wasn't as willing to do something so chaotic. Wow, wish I was a time god, that would be so helpful. Hermes said with whimsy. He smiled happily. I could nap more, the potential for pranks too. It's never going to happen. Zeus warned his son. Having the Titan of Time nearly come back was bad enough. Toss in a time using Hermes and they'd all be in trouble. Hermes snapped his fingers. Dang nabbit. Naruto waited for the stitching to hold, for the blood flow to slow, before he patched it with some fabric he tore from his leg and tape that was in his pouch. With a bit of effort, the mortal got back to his feet. He took a few steps and braced himself against a tree while he held his injured side. As per the norm, Naruto was right. That hurt like hell. Naruto clenched his hand into a fist and stubbornly pushed on. He disappeared into the shadows of the woods. He would have to travel downwind once he found the nearest creek or sewer to clear away his scent. The hunters were after him, and it would be a cold day in the underworld before he was found. That sounds like an extreme version of hide and seek. Do the hunters do that, Talia? Reina asked curiously. Talia frowned. We don't play hide and go seek. We do training exercises for stealth and tracking. Basically hide and seek, Artemis said bluntly. She wasn't going to lie. She loved that game. She always beat Apollo whenever they played it. Lady Artemis. Talia protested while her cheeks flushed. That was so not cool to just blurt out. The punk had a representative to protect, damn it. He sat here, a hunter said softly as she pressed her hand against a tree. And dug the arrow out of his side. Amazing that he didn't leave a blood trail. Another commented. There was a hint of scorn in her words. I'd have thought he'd forget how to live like us when he left with his uncle. Crusa, watch thy tongue. The first hunter warned. Her eyes narrowed as she looked around the area. The dirt a few feet away from this spot was disturbed, as though another person stood there. Something was wrong. I apologize, Zoe, but tell me, why do we care? Crusa asked. She crossed her arms over her chest with a huff. He's just another boy now, but at least he has a bit of brains to stay away. Zoe turned and frowned at the hunter. He is Our Lady's son and he's been missing for 7 months. Not even the gods can find him. Why do we have to? Crusa asked again. He's a boy. He's Our Lady's son. Zoe repeated herself firmly. Wait a minute. A grin spread across Talia's face before she laughed. Oh damn, Zoe cares. Who'd have thought? Of course she would have. Artemis frowned. She wasn't that heartless to boys. Talia and Percy let out a pair of snorts, clearly showing their disagreement. She turned and walked further into the woods as a small frown crossed her face. There was one answer that she had to know now more than ever, a question she will undoubtedly share with her patron. Who were you speaking with, little brother? She can be salvaged. Aphrodite gleefully exclaimed. She began to wring her hands together like a wicked witch. Now just a little more into the naughty territory and bam. I got her right where I want her. I'd love to see you try. Artemis said with a smirk. You've failed at every attempt to turn Zoe, Aphrodite. You need to accept defeat. Never. The love goddess declared vehemently. After all, everyone needed their chance at love. A small meal, some kind of stew was offered to the 3 demigods, and they took it. Annabeth had a few pleasant conversations with the other hunters, but for the most part, Talia and Luke urged her to stay away from them. Now they were settled together in a small tent offered by a hunter for them, and Annabeth slept soundly next to Luke while the boy and Talia spoke quietly to one another. He wanted you and him to leave, Talia said to the miffed boy that sat with them. Luke was still sore that Naruto had vanished in the middle of the fight. He knew that the hunters were coming. How? Luke shot back lowly. How did he know? He's keeping something from us, Talia, and if he comes back, we need to find out what it is. Nar Whiskers will come back. Talia rebuffed Luke's concern. Naruto hadn't left them thus far and he'd had many chances to do so during their journey together. And we'll get answers when he does. Their makeshift tent was opened by the Persian princess that had the hushed conversation before. She looked at Luke with hardly concealed disdain and then looked at Talia with a bit more approval. I've come with an offer you cannot refuse, Nico said with his best Godfather impression. But Godfather, I wanna be dateable for a little while longer. Percy let out a whimper. I'm sorry, but I cannot allow this. Knock it off you chuckleheads. Talia shook her head at her idiot cousins. So annoying. My lady would wish to speak with thee. The girl said curtly. Luke started to join Talia in getting up, but he was stopped by a glare. Not thou, boy. Thou shalt stay and watch the child. Luke frowned and held his tongue while Talia frowned outright. Luke may have been acting like an idiot lately, but that didn't give this chick the right to talk down to her friend like that. Talia made to open her mouth and say this, but a shake of the head from Luke told her to let it slide. They weren't exactly on their home turf right now. Talia quietly left the tent and followed the taller girl to a larger tent of silver with a crescent moon on the front. She stole glances and noticed the tension that had overcome the hunters. Like they were all torn from being elated or upset at some news. We hate him, we like him, we hate him, we like him, Piper said, pretending to pluck flower petals. Oh, the conflicting emotions. I'd hate to see you guys arguing over what food was better. Burgers. Talia said sternly. We even cast a vote. And how many did you bribe? Jason asked dryly. Quote ellipsis. Only a few. The hunter mumbled and quickly continued to read. Beyond that, Talia saw that there were a few white wolves that looked like they were patrolling the camp. Melissa walked out of the tent with a frown directed at Talia, but nodded to the other girl. She's waiting for you. I am aware. The girl walked past without another word. Talia followed and entered the tent. The interior was filled with furs of all sorts of animals, a few looked like hellhound furs. In the center of the tent were a few cushions set before a table, and on the other side sat the same young hunter from before, the one with the crescent moon on her circlet. My lady, I've brought the girl as you requested. The leading hunter, the Persian princess as Talia dubbed her, stopped and bowed. She sent a cross look to Talia when she noticed the girl just stood there. The hunter righted herself and scowled at the girl. Have thou no manners, girl? Enough, Zoe, I don't think she knows who I am. That's forgivable. The young girl smiled at Talia before her form shone brightly. Talia had to close her eyes and look away before she looked back to see an older version of the girl seated behind the table. The beauty of this woman was even more prominent than before, and Talia found herself a little envious. So, you do want to grow up? Annabeth asked curiously. Well, when you see something like that. Talia trailed off. So I should just stay in my child form, it seems. Artemis thoughtfully rubbed her chin. The woman smiled slightly at her. My name is Artemis, and this is my Lieutenant Zoe Nightshade. Talia certainly felt stupefied at the proclamation before she took a seat at one of the cushions offered to her. You're Artemis? Like, the goddess of the moon? Yes. Artemis nodded. And the goddess of the hunt. ... Wow. It was all Talia could really say. What do you want from me? Artemis smiled gently at her. Well, I just want to ask you a few questions. Questions? Talia frowned. Like what? Would you like to join the hunt? Artemis' question was blunt and to the point. It would have thrown Talia off guard if she wasn't used to blunt questions from Naruto. To skirt around an issue is to waste time that could cost someone a life. It's better to be blunt and get the issue out in the air. You know, the opposite of what Aphrodite does. Artemis smirked at the love goddess, who huffed in annoyance. Please, playing around an issue is where the drama lies. Talia frowned slightly, which caused Artemis to frown as well. What do you mean? For every young girl, around your age and a bit older, I ask them to join me in the hunt. To slay monsters at my side for eternity. Slay monsters for eternity. That certainly sounded nice to Talia. Get some payback for the horror she was put through over the years. Talia crossed her arms. What's the catch? No boys, Zeus said firmly. He did not find this to be too bad of a fault. While he was not initially for his demigod daughter to join her half-sister, he liked it afterwards. Even if she didn't become the child of the great prophecy. The catch. Artemis hummed and then shook her head. It is not guaranteed immortality. You could still fall in battle, but you must swear an oath to the hunt. To forsake the foolhardiness of love or boys. That was it. No way, it wasn't that easy. Talia looked around the cabin as her thoughts ran wild. Her eyes landed on a small metal box set on a yellow blanket slightly behind Artemis. It was, like many other things, shaped like a crescent moon. There was something unnatural about it though. Talia couldn't put her finger on it, but it put her off. The question is simple, thou should answer before we take thy silence as a no. Zoe hissed impatiently. Kitty's got claws. Leo whistled. She's more anxious this time, Talia noted. Man, she really is nervous over Naruto. If she wasn't being such a jerk to my other, I might gush about that. Quote. You gush? Percy asked with a skeptical brow raised. I have my moments, the hunter replied tersely. It wasn't a proud thing for her to admit. Talia glared at her and Zoe glared back, but her eyes flickered to the box that Talia had noticed. Something about it made Zoe uneasy. What was so special about the damn metal moon? Zoe, Artemis said sternly, and her gaze had the lieutenant back off. The goddess looked back at Talia. It is a simple yes or no, Talia. Quote. What about my friends? Talia asked softly. Luke couldn't keep Annabeth safe alone and, what if, he was right and Naruto ran off for good? Naruto was just a mortal, a weird one, but a mortal nonetheless. He didn't have to stick around with a bunch of demigods and risk his life for them. Yeah, I doubt we could have made it that far without you, Annabeth said with a smile to her immortal friend. Someone had to shock all the monsters. Talia grinned back lightly. If the girl were a bit older, she'd be in here with you, being asked the same question. As it is now, she is too young to make a decision without understanding the consequences. So there are consequences, huh? Talia asked. Artemis arched a brow in bemusement while Zoe scowled outright. Talia crossed her arms and waited, but neither rose to the bait. Artemis continued despite the question asked not being answered. The boy, well, I suppose I should tell him where to go, but someone must surely be looking for him by now. You'd just throw him to the wolves? Talia asked with a frown. Zoe scoffed and muttered scornfully. That would be too kind. Harsh much. Hermes frowned at Artemis. Give it a moment. The huntress waved off. Zoe. Artemis snapped curtly. Hermes mumbled a half-hearted, thank you. Talia, however, wasn't so quick to forgive the discrimination this time. What's your deal, princess? Zoe glared at the girl and looked to the goddess. Apologies, milady, but shouldn't this wait until after our search is completed? This girl is already used to the boy's company and the boy has a name and his name is Luke. Talia retorted with a frown. And like it or not, he is my friend. And, now it's time for the downward spiral. Talia grimaced as she read on, this was going to be inwardly painful. Zoe frowned back at her. Thou are a fool. Only fool I see around here is you, princess. Leo snapped his fingers as a sassy fashion. Oh no she d'en tilde. That boy will turn on thou as soon as it suits him. Hey, telling the future is my thing. Apollo pouted with crossed arms. Don't say that like you know him. Talia growled. Zoe scoffed. He's like any other man on this planet, concerned only to sat the needs and desires of their real bra. She's not fully wrong. Athena commented and gave pointed looks to the males in her family. Each one refused to look her in the eyes at her statement, because it was sort of correct in a way. Zoe, that is enough. Artemis' words were quick as a whip and the lieutenant became silent. The tension was high and Artemis sighed before she looked at the static that danced across Talia's hands. I apologize, Talia. I know that Luke is your friend. This decision is hard, perhaps, another time, I shall ask you. If we meet again, maybe circumstances will be different. Doubt it. Talia scowled and made to rise. Says the new lieutenant. Artemis chuckled as Talia's face colored pink. Yeah, ha, good one Lady Artemis. Talia said weakly. She pouted. Could her other stop embarrassing her already? Artemis raised her hand and stopped her. Before you go, I have another question. Artemis waited for Talia to sit back down and then pulled out a silver arrowhead that made Talia's eyes widen. One of the same arrowheads Naruto used when he fought monsters. You could tell because, unlike the arrows of the hunters, there was no way to attach a shaft to them. Artemis must have seen Talia's eyes widen, because her silvery ones narrowed. You've seen this before, I take it. Yeah, all of your hunters have them, Talia said quickly. She crossed her arms again and looked away, her gaze returned to the metal box behind Artemis. What the hell was it? Why did it make her wary? Why did it feel like it didn't belong? It obviously has boy cooties on it. Burn it in a holy fire. Piper declared. Leo lit up his hands. I said in a holy fire, Leo. Leo closed his palms, crossing his arms. Well, see if I burn anything for you again, humph. Leo, you're the farthest thing from being a saint, Piper said dryly. My statement still stands. I'll just buy a Zippo lighter. This is not one of my hunter's arrowheads, Talia. Artemis, voice was low. This belongs to someone outside of the hunt, someone we've been looking for a long time now. Talia frowned. What do you want with whiskers? Artemis paused and a small chuckle came from her lips. Talia's brows furrowed and she looked to Zoe, surprised to see a faint ghost of a smile on the princess's own features. Talia looked back to the goddess, her frown still in place. What's so funny? Artemis sighed, a smile on her face. It's an apt nickname, I suppose. Yes it is, milady. Zoe nodded. Shame we did not consider it. A blessing, even, that Lord Apollo doesn't know of it. Indeed it is. Yeah, I would shamelessly rib him about it. Apollo nodded. He could totally understand where the two were coming from. Talia scowled. Wanna let me in on the joke here? Artemis turned and grabbed the two items that Talia kept finding herself drawn to look at. Up close, they were even more out of place. The yellow cloth was not a fur, but a blanket with a golden sun etched into it, from what Talia could make out despite the folds. The crescent moon metal box, however, was still a puzzle. Artemis pressed the side and the top opened. A mobile with shapes of stars and small moons popped out, and the song, Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star, began to play. Talia's brow shot up and her jaw dropped as she put the pieces together. She just blew her mind. Frank laughed and Hazel giggled. I'd be slack-jawed after that discovery, too. The geokinetic admitted. I think everyone would be. Jason agreed. It's not something you'd learn every day. Her eyes went to Artemis and she thought over things that Naruto had said. He vaguely hinted to his past, never once revealing who his adoptive mother was. I left. Had to. My sisters were starting to drive me nuts. Mom likes to hunt. Older sisters. They're awesome. A bit hard-headed sometimes, but they've got good hearts. You could call her a naturalist. Oh my god. Talia looked at Artemis. You're Naruto's mom. What was your first clue? Nico asked Talia snidely. The giant moon crown on her head. No, the matching awesome silver motif. Talia snarked back. Quote. So she likes his silver suit, Talia flushed and glared at Aphrodite. That's not what I meant. But it is what you said, Tilda. Aphrodite, enough. Artemis huffed and looked at Talia. Talia, read. Party pooper. Yes, Lady Artemis. Artemis smiled gently and turned the mobile off, where it folded away. Yes. Yes I am. Ow. Gods above and across the world, that hurts. Naruto hissed as he slumped against a tree. His eyes drooped and his hand went to his poorly covered side. It burned, like nothing Naruto had ever felt before. A pained hiss left his lips. A mile to go. Naruto groaned and rose up only to stumble and fall to the forest floor on his uninjured side. It'd have been funnier if he landed on his injured side. Ares grunted in displeasure. He ignored the glare Artemis sent his way. His wound was reopened, it had to be. That was the only reason it hurt so much. That or it was infected. Either way, Naruto had to push on. The fire came back, the burn was more intense than before. It was the most agonizing pain Naruto had ever felt in his life. Naruto stopped and braced himself on his hands and knees. Keep going. Come on, Naruto, be the little engine that could. Percy encouraged. You liked that one because it was blue, didn't you? Annabeth asked. She already knew the answer to it if her smile was anything to go by. Hey, it was either that or Thomas the train engine, and those faces on trains scared me as a kid. Freaky googly eyes. Percy shuddered. Naruto could hardly get back up, but somehow he managed to. He stumbled forward, using the trees as support. Eyes screwed shut as the pain flared. Naruto slumped down to his knees and took labored breaths. Finally. A deep voice echoed around him as a shadow encompassed Naruto's body. The blonde barely managed to jump away as a red hand-like claw smashed down into the ground where he once stood. The trees melted away into nothing and Naruto was left in a poorly illuminated area. Naruto's eyes moved up as a red claw overshadowed his form. He looked up beyond that and found a massive fox, with rabbit-like ears. Nine tails danced behind the creature and two blood-red eyes glared down at Naruto with so much hatred, that Naruto could barely breathe. Well, who do we have here? Ares grinned cruelly. Finally, we get a good fight scene, nice. Uzumaki. It snarled. You are the last of your kind, the last that could potentially end me. There can only be one. Leo declared. Wrong scenario. Frank shook his head. Oh, right. Get up on the nine tails back, kid. What? Naruto asked. He bit down on his lip behind his mask as another flare of pain shot up around him. Naruto pressed his hand into his side and looked down at the wound. His eyes went wide as red, energy leaked from his side over his hand and slithered towards the massive fox. You have my chakra. I want it back. The claw rose back up and shot down right at Naruto's body. The middle claw on the fox's hand passed through Naruto's chest, and would have torn through his whole torso if it hadn't merely phased through him like a ghost. What the hell is going on? Naruto demanded around a pained cry. The fox snarled at him, its teeth bared as its eyes glared at him. It seems our connection is not strong enough for me to simply kill you here, boy. I must wait until I reform to take back what is mine. Be ready, Uzumaki, for when I do return, I will take your life. And then, the world. That is not funny. Zeus glared at the messenger god. Just a joke, Pops, no worries. Hermes laughed weakly while he started to sweat under Zeus' gaze. Isn't he matched with Typhon in strength? Athena pondered aloud, making Zeus nearly pale. Oh, damn it. The king groaned while Poseidon smirked at him. All you have to do is ask, Zeus. Shut up, Poseidon. What are you? Naruto asked. The fox snarled at him. I am your death. It lunged forward with its maw open wide and closed around Naruto's form before he could move. Naruto's eyes snapped open and jerked from where he rested in an abandoned bear's cave. He hissed and moved his hand to press against his side. Naruto looked down at the wound and pulled the tape away to look at the stitching. There was no sign of any of that red energy. Naruto scanned the outside of the cave he had hid himself in. It was set downwind of nearly every direction, so he would be safe from discovery here. There was also no sign of a giant monster fox trying to eat him. He frowned and sat back against the rock wall. This bore some looking into. What was that fox? What is chakra? Just what exactly was he? You are a ninja. Percy exclaimed proudly. Embrace the ninja-tude. Annabeth palmed her face and groaned. It was enjoyable and lively. Artemis commented with a small smile. I hope to see more of this. Meh, it was boring. Ares argued with a scowl. We could have at least gotten a decent fight scene. Percy was about to sarcastically call out his immortal rival when his foot bumped something under his seat. He leaned down to pick it up. It was a bunch of bananas. Where the heck did these come from? Ares glared at Percy as the son of Poseidon pulled the bunch out. So it was you, he thundered, pulling out a sword. I should have known, you freaking half-blooded brat. Percy pulled out Riptide and dropped the bananas. You know, it's about time we settled this. Taking the words out of my mouth. I'll kill you. I'll stab your face. Enough. Both of you sit down, now. Both Percy and Ares cowed to the demanding voice of Hestia, who was on fire. The goddess of the hearth cooled down and smiled sweetly at them. See. Was that so hard? No, Percy and Ares shook their heads in clear terror while they hid their weapons. Good. Hestia looked at Talia. Perhaps you should pass the book our way, dear.